Some bands were written off. Critics had already made up their minds, audiences were moving on, and the radio wasn't calling back. Then one song came along, and everything changed. Here are 10 awesome 70s songs that totally saved terrible bands. Number 10. Roxanne, by The Police.
Roxanne, you don't have to wear that.
By 1978, punk was king, and a trio of relative unknowns from England were struggling to get anyone to take them seriously. Sting, Stuart Copeland, and Andy Summers had been playing together for less than 2 years. Their early material wasn't setting the world on fire, and record labels weren't exactly lining up with offers. The band had formed in London in 1977, at a time when the music press was obsessed with the raw aggression of the punk scene. The Police occupied an awkward space. They were influenced by punk's urgency, but also drawn to reggae, jazz, and new wave. That hybrid sound made it hard for industry gatekeepers to know what to do with them.
Roxanne.
Then came Roxanne. Released in April 1978 as part of their debut album Outlandos d'Amour, the song had a deceptively simple premise: a man pleading with a woman he loves to leave behind her life on the streets. The way the Police delivered it was unlike anything else on the radio at the time. Sting's voice carried a raw urgency, and the reggae-influenced rhythm gave it a pulse that felt immediate and alive. BBC Radio 1 declined to add the song to its playlist, and the band's label A&M leaned into that, marketing it as effectively banned to generate attention. It didn't chart well in the UK on first release regardless. In the United States, however, it caught on. A re-release in 1979 pushed it into the UK Top 12, and suddenly, the Police were a band people couldn't ignore. Before Roxanne, they were just another act trying to survive in a crowded post-punk landscape. After it, they were on their way to becoming one of the biggest bands of the following decade. The song also established the template for what the band would continue to do, fusing different sonic worlds into something that felt cohesive and urgent rather than confused. That approach would carry them through Regata de Blanc, Zenyatta Mondata, and eventually to Every Breath You Take in 1983. But the thread that ran through all of it started here. Number 9. Go Your Own Way, by Fleetwood Mac. Fleetwood Mac had been around since 1967, but by the mid-1970s, the band was in real trouble. Personnel changes had been relentless. The group had cycled through so many lineups that longtime fans barely recognized them. The original Peter Green-era band was a memory. The version that followed, centered around Bob Welch, had modest success before he departed in 1974. The 1975 edition of Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks brought fresh energy, and their self-titled 1975 album sold well. But the band's internal dynamics were deteriorating fast. By the time they entered the studio to record Rumors in 1976, Buckingham and Nicks had broken up as a couple. John and Christine McVie were going through a divorce, and Mick Fleetwood was dealing with the collapse of his own marriage. The band was held together mostly by professionalism and shared necessity. Go Your Own Way, written by Buckingham about Nicks, was the album's opening statement and first single, released in January 1977. His guitar work was sharp and propulsive, and the harmonies, despite the very real tension between the people performing them, were immaculate. Nicks reportedly objected to some of the lyrics, finding them unfair to her, but she sang them anyway. The single reached number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. Rumors went on to sell over 40 million copies worldwide and spent 31 non-consecutive weeks at number 1 on the Billboard 200. For a band that had been dismissed by many as a relic of the British blues scene, Go Your Own Way, was the opening statement of a remarkable reinvention. Fleetwood Mac didn't just survive, they became one of the defining acts of an entire era. The painful circumstances behind the album's creation became part of its mythology, and rumors would go on to win the Grammy for Album of the Year in 1978. None of it would have landed the same way without that opening track setting the tone. Number 8. More Than a Feeling by Boston. Before More Than a Feeling, Boston didn't exist, at least not as far as the music industry was concerned. Tom Scholz had spent years recording demos in his basement in Massachusetts, sending tapes to labels and getting rejected. The band had no real live presence, no industry connections, and no touring history to speak of. Scholz was meticulous to the point of obsession. He was also an MIT-trained engineer who built his own recording equipment, and the quality of his home recordings was unusually high. Still, labels were slow to respond. The rejection pile grew. Epic Records finally signed them in 1976, and Boston's self-titled debut album was released that August. More Than a Feeling was the lead single. From the opening guitar notes, now among the most recognizable in rock history, the song announced something different. Scholz had layered guitars with precision that felt almost architectural. The melody was enormous, built for AM radio, but with enough depth to reward repeated listening. Brad Delp's vocals soared above it all with an effortless clarity. The song reached number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100, and the album eventually sold over 17 million copies in the United States alone, making it one of the best-selling debut albums in history at the time. There was no gradual climb for Boston. More Than a Feeling put them at the top almost instantly, and it did so for a group that had spent years being told no by an industry that simply wasn't listening. Scholz was so particular about the follow-up that even with the pressure of a massive debut, Don't Look Back didn't arrive until 1978, 2 years later. It was the third album, third stage, that would take a full decade. The waiting didn't hurt them. By then, the audience they had built was loyal enough to show up whenever he was ready. Number 7. Carry On Wayward Son by Kansas. Kansas had released 2 albums by 1976 and sold a modest number of copies, but they hadn't broken through in any meaningful way. The progressive rock scene in the mid-1970s was crowded, dominated almost entirely by British acts like Yes, Genesis, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. An American band working in that space faced skepticism from critics and indifference from mainstream radio. The band had come together in Topeka, Kansas, in the early 1970s, and their ambitious sound, blending hard rock with orchestral textures, violin, and complex arrangements, set them apart from almost everyone around them. The trouble was, being different wasn't enough on its own. Their record label encouraged them to open their third album, Leftoverture, with something that would make an immediate impact. What they came up with was Carry On Wayward Son. The song opened with an a cappella vocal harmony before erupting into one of the most energetic guitar riffs of the decade. Robbie Steinhardt's violin wove through the progressive arrangements in a way that felt both unexpected and completely natural. Kerry Livgren's lyrics carried a spiritual restlessness, a search for meaning and direction that connected with listeners who felt the same way. Released as a single in late 1976, it reached number 11 on the Billboard Hot 100. Leftoverture sold over 2 million copies, and Kansas finally had the commercial foothold they had been working toward for years. The band would follow it with Point of No Return in 1977, which gave them another significant hit in Dust in the Wind, a quieter, more stripped-down song that showed a completely different side of the band. But Carry On Wayward Son was what opened the door, and rock radio never stopped playing it. Carry on. Number 6. Baker Street by Gerry Rafferty.
Winding your way down to Baker Street. Lighting.
Gerry Rafferty had been in and out of musical partnerships for most of the early 1970s. He'd been part of Stealers Wheel, which had a minor hit with Stuck in the Middle with You in 1973. But the group fell apart amid business disputes and legal troubles that dragged on for years. By the time Rafferty was free to record solo material, he had been largely absent from public view, and the momentum he'd built had dissipated almost entirely. City to City, his 1978 solo album, changed all of that, and Baker Street was the reason.
You're trying now.
The song was named after a street in London, and Rafferty wrote it with a specific person in mind, a friend who had moved to the city looking for opportunity and found something more uncertain instead. The lyrical world of the song is one of transience, late nights, and quietly fading ambitions. It felt true because it was. The opening saxophone riff, played by session musician Raphael Ravenscroft, became one of the most iconic instrumental hooks of the decade. Ravenscroft was reportedly paid a flat session fee of £27.50, the standard musicians' union rate at the time, for the recording and did not receive royalties, a footnote in music history that still gets mentioned.
You know he'll always keep moving. You know he's
Baker Street reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 3 in the UK. City to City topped the Billboard 200 for weeks. For a man who had spent years in legal battles and industry limbo, it was a turnaround that few people had expected. Rafferty never quite replicated the commercial success of Baker Street, but the song gave him a place in the permanent record of the decade, a single that people who lived through that time still associate with a very specific feeling, even if they can't always name it right away.
winding your way down to Baker Street. Lighting.
Number 5. Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen. By 1975, Queen had released 3 albums and generated enough buzz to be considered a promising act, but not a sure thing. There were genuine doubts at EMI about the direction the band was taking, and those doubts deepened considerably when Freddie Mercury presented the label with a song that was nearly 6 minutes long, moved through a ballad section, an operatic middle passage, and a hard rock finale, and had no traditional chorus. Radio programmers were openly skeptical. The received wisdom of the time was that a song built this way simply could not work as a single. Mercury was unbothered. He had been developing the song for years, and he was certain about what it needed to be. DJ Kenny Everett, who was at Capital Radio in London at the time, obtained an advance copy and played it on his show in October 1975. Listener response was immediate and intense, and Everett played it over and over across multiple broadcasts. The phones didn't stop ringing. EMI had no choice but to release it. Bohemian Rhapsody entered the UK singles chart and climbed steadily, reaching number 1, where it stayed for 9 weeks. The accompanying promotional film, an early example of what would later be called a music video, was innovative in its own right. The song became one of the best-selling singles in UK history and anchored A Night at the Opera, which became one of Queen's most celebrated records. The gamble Mercury had insisted on turned out to be the defining moment of their career. Number 4. Dream On by Aerosmith. Aerosmith had a rough start. Their 1973 self-titled debut album sold poorly, and the band was consuming more of Columbia Records' patience than they were generating in returns. Critics were dismissive, often categorizing them as a low-rent imitation of bands like the Rolling Stones, and there was real uncertainty about whether the label would continue backing them. Steven Tyler had actually written Dream On as a teenager, sitting at a piano in a house in New Hampshire, where his father worked as a caretaker during the summers. The song was about the gap between where a young person imagines their life going and where it seems to actually be heading, the quiet ache of ambition measured against time. It was recorded for the debut album and released as a single in 1973, but it barely registered. Columbia reissued it in late 1975, and it began climbing the charts in early 1976. The re-released single peaked at number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the spring of 1976. By that point, Aerosmith had already released Toys in the Attic and Rocks, which had built their fanbase considerably. But the renewed success of Dream On reframed their entire story. Tyler's vocal performance on the song, particularly the final, extended high notes at the climax, is considered one of the more remarkable moments in 1970s rock. Joe Perry's guitar work stayed disciplined throughout, giving the song room to breathe and letting the emotion sit where Tyler placed it. Dream On didn't just rehabilitate a single, it gave Aerosmith an origin story worth telling. The image of a young Tyler writing the song at that piano, years before anyone had heard his name, became part of how the band understood themselves. And it gave audiences a way in. A song with enough emotional directness to reach people who might otherwise have found the swagger of Toys in the Attic a bit too much. The two versions of Aerosmith that the decade offered, the raw arena rock band and the band that wrote Dream On, turned out to be the same band, and that range is part of what kept them going. Number 3. Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult. Blue Oyster Cult had spent the early 1970s building a cult following, the name was accurate, but had not broken into mainstream audiences. Their music was dense, heavy, and loaded with cryptic literary references and dark imagery. Critics admired them in limited doses, but couldn't quite figure out what to do with them commercially. Hard rock radio tolerated them. Pop radio had no use for them. Don't Fear the Reaper, released in 1976 as the lead single from Agents of Fortune, was a different kind of song. Buck Dharma, the stage name of guitarist Donald Roser, wrote it during a period of personal reflection about mortality. The central idea was one of acceptance rather than dread, and the tone of the song matched that. Melancholic, but tranquil, almost peaceful. The circular guitar figure at its core had a hypnotic quality. The melody opened rather than closed. The song had space in it, which was unusual for a band associated with heavier sounds. That space is part of what made it accessible to listeners who had never paid attention to Blue Oyster Cult before. It reached number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100 and introduced the band to an audience substantially larger than anything they had previously reached. Agents of Fortune became their best-selling album. Their name finally meant something to people beyond the devoted few who had followed them from the beginning. The song's legacy has grown steadily since then. Its presence in popular culture, including a famous 2000 Saturday Night Live sketch that joked about the cowbell in the recording, gave it a second life with younger audiences, who then went back and discovered the original. That's a path very few rock songs from the era have traveled. Number 2. Slow Ride by Foghat. Foghat had been working steadily since the early 1970s, releasing a series of blues rock albums that earned them a loyal but modest following. They were known as a strong live act and spent most of their time on the road, building their audience one venue at a time. The studio records were solid, but none of them had produced the kind of song that would take them beyond their current ceiling. The band had formed in London in 1971 from the remnants of the British blues group Savoy Brown. Their sound was straightforward, unpretentious, and built entirely around the pleasure of a good groove. They moved to the United States early in their career, where the audiences for that kind of rock were more receptive, and they toured the American circuit relentlessly throughout the early part of the decade. Slow Ride, released in 1975 from the album Fool for the City, was different in scale, if not in spirit. The song opened with a gradual, deliberate build, a long, rolling groove that took its time getting anywhere. The full album version clocked in at over 8 minutes, and even the edited single ran considerably longer than standard radio fare. The riff was unhurried and completely confident, and the rhythm had a swagger that connected immediately with album-oriented rock radio programmers. The single reached number 20 on the Billboard Hot 100, and Slow Ride became a staple of rock radio that outlasted the album cycle by years. Foghat's profile rose in a way it hadn't before, and Foghat Live, released in 1977, became one of the stronger live albums of the era. The song gave them something a touring reputation alone never could, a signature, something that identified them the moment the opening notes played. For a band that had spent years building their audience the hard way, one gig at a time, that kind of instant recognition was a different kind of currency altogether. It meant that when someone who had never seen them live heard the song on the radio, they already knew the name. Number 1. Hotel California by Eagles. By 1976, the Eagles were already a successful band, but they were also at a crossroads that could have gone badly. One of these nights had been their commercial high point to that point, but founding member Bernie Leadon had departed at the end of 1975, unhappy with the direction the band was heading. His replacement, Joe Walsh, was a harder, more electric player, and the shift in sound was audible. Some longtime fans were uneasy. Critics who had celebrated the band's country rock sound were not sure what to make of the harder edge. Record executives were watching closely to see if the transition would hold. Hotel California answered the question definitively. Released in February 1977 as the lead single from the album of the same name, the song opened with Don Felder's acoustic guitar figure before expanding into something larger and more deliberate. Don Henley's lead vocal gave the lyrics, a study of excess, illusion, and the darker interior life of California in the 1970s, a weariness that didn't feel performed. It felt earned.
Welcome to the Hotel California.
The song reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. The album sold over 32 million copies worldwide and remains one of the best-selling records in history. The closing guitar duet between Felder and Walsh is frequently cited as one of the finest moments in rock guitar. Felder had written the music for the song, and the two players developed their parts carefully before recording. The result was something that felt simultaneously planned and alive. For a band navigating a significant internal transition, Hotel California didn't just hold them together, it elevated them to a position that few acts ever reach. It became the song by which everything else in their catalog would be judged. Don Henley later described the album as the Eagles' attempt to sum up a specific cultural moment, the end of the idealism that had defined the previous decade, replaced by something more complicated and harder to name. Hotel California, the song, caught that feeling precisely. People who lived through the 1970s often say it sounds exactly like how that era felt from the inside, even if they can't always explain why. Every band on this list had a moment where things could have gone the other way. Careers that looked like they were winding down suddenly found a second gear. Songs that labels doubted, radio programmers hesitated over, and critics weren't sure how to categorize ended up becoming the moments those bands are remembered by. The 1970s produced a lot of music like that, music that outlasted the decade it came from, and kept finding new listeners long after the charts moved on. If you enjoyed taking this trip back through those years, go ahead and hit like on this video, and subscribe so you catch everything that's coming. There's a lot more from this era worth getting into.